Now, most people think faith is a feeling. Some people think it's a moment during praise and worship. Some people feel it's a peace that you feel during prayer, or it's an emotional experience that comes and goes. But when those feelings disappear, they start to ask questions. Why do I feel distant from God? Why isn't my faith much stronger? Why do I feel spiritually stuck at this time? But what if we're measuring faith incorrectly? What if faith isn't primarily something that you feel? What if faith is something that you build? Now, as an engineer, I've spent years thinking about systems. Every system has an input, and that input produces an output. And when those outputs aren't what we expect, we don't blame the system, we investigate the inputs. But yet when it comes to our spiritual lives, we often abandon this logic. We expect growth without discipline. We expect peace without practice, or transformation without intentionality. Now today I want to explore a simple idea, and that is that your faith may feel empty because you're measuring it by emotions instead of outcomes. And hopefully that changes everything. Now let's start with the uncomfortable truth. Feelings are unreliable indicators of spiritual maturity. There are days you feel incredibly close to God, and there are days you feel nothing at all. Now, the mistake many people make is assuming that God's presence fluctuates according to their emotions. But Scripture repeatedly points us towards something deeper. That is definitely not feelings. Now, a farmer doesn't walk into a field and ask, do I feel these crops are growing? No, of course not. They look for evidence. And that evidence is growth. That evidence is fruit. That evidence is change. And that evidence is results. In the same way, the Bible doesn't tell us to examine our emotional state on a day-to-day basis. It tells us to examine our own lives. Are we becoming more patient? Are we becoming more loving? Are we becoming more disciplined? Or are you becoming more forgiving? Are you becoming more self-controlled? Those are the outputs. And the outputs will tell the truth. Feelings can lie. Outputs rarely do. Now in engineering, there is a simple principle, and that is that the outputs reveal the quality of the system. If a machine consistently produces defective products, we don't stand around hoping for better outcomes. We investigate the process. We examine the inputs, and that same principle applies spiritually. Let's say someone spends 10 minutes every morning in genuine prayer. Now, I'm not talking about rushing when they're praying, not performing or ticking a box, that they're actually praying and they're actually listening. Maybe they're actually reflecting on Scripture. What should the output be? Many people would think and say, maybe peace, for example, and you might be correct, but that's not the most important output. A better question is, what happens when life gets difficult? What happens when someone criticizes you? What happens when you're exhausted? What happens when your plans fall apart? Do you react differently than you used to? Are you slower to anger? Are you quicker to forgive? Are you more resilient under pressure? Because those, my friends, are the measurable outputs. And they reveal whether something is genuinely changing inside of you. Because faith was never meant to stay on the inside of your prayer journal. It was meant to appear in your behavior. So here's a question I rarely hear people ask. If your spiritual practices disappeared today or tomorrow, will there be any difference in your character? Think about it. If you stopped praying, if you stopped reading Scripture, let's assume that you stopped attending church, hypothetically. Would you be more patient? Would you be more kind? Would your integrity change? Will anything change? Will your relationships change or your kindness change? Because if the answer is no, then let me ask the difficult question, what exactly were those practices producing? Because many people are faithfully watering a tree that isn't growing, not because God isn't working, but because they've confused activity with transformation. They've confused religious motion with spiritual progress. Of course, they're busy. But of course, busyness is different. They're not changing. Business can become one of the greatest forms of self-deception, because sometimes movement feels like growth, but they're not the same thing, and that's very important. You can read more Scripture than ever before and still be more judgmental. Do you realize that you can even pray more and still become more impatient? You can attend as many services as you want and still be an unforgiving person. The goal was never activity. The goal was transformation. Now, before anyone misunderstands what I'm trying to say, I'm not suggesting that we reduce faith to numbers. Faith is a relationship. It's not a spreadsheet, but relationships still produce evidence. Imagine someone says, I want to become more patient. Now, that is a wonderful goal. But what does patience actually look like? Maybe it means that you interrupted fewer people this week, right? Maybe it means that you responded more calmly to criticism, or you spent less time arguing online. Or maybe you chose not to send that angry message. Those are the real outputs. Or maybe your goal was, say, generosity. How would you know you're actually growing or becoming more generous? It's not because you feel like you're generous, but because you actually gave. Or maybe because you actually served. Because someone else's life was improved because of you would be a good output. So faith becomes powerful when it leaves the realm of intention and enters into the realm of action. Not because God needs any proof, but because we actually do. So one of the most dangerous phrases I find in the modern life is, I'm trying. I'm trying to be patient. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to grow spiritually. But trying is often impossible to evaluate. But growth is not. So here's my challenge to you. Choose one area of your faith. Just one. Doesn't have to be more than one. You could try patience. I could give you another one. Forgiveness. Maybe another one. Generosity. Maybe another one. Discipline. One more. Humility. Pick one of these, or you could pick one of yours and ask yourself, what would measurable transformation look like this week? Now notice I didn't say next year, not someday, this week. Because faith isn't proven by what we intend. It is revealed by what we produce. And so the question is not how inspired do I feel today? The question is, what is my life actually producing? And if the outputs aren't where you want them to be, don't lose hope. Engineers don't panic when they see a problem. Of course, we've seen many in our days. What they do is they improve the system. So examine the inputs. Return to your fundamentals. And those fundamentals could include prayer. It could include meditating on scripture, or it could include things like obedience. It could include things like community building relationships. And you'd find that over time, the outputs will change. It wouldn't happen overnight, but it will inevitably occur because healthy roots will always produce fruit. And so the question is, what fruit is your life producing today? Now, if this resonated with you, leave a comment below and tell me one spiritual output that you intentionally are going to work on this week. I would love to hear it.